On April 4th, the PAC met to conduct its annual review of Shotspotter. This quoted text is the key paragraph in the adopted motion against authorizing ongoing use and renewing the contract. Pursuant to our surveillance technology ordinance, each year a finding that the benefits outweigh the costs must be made for ongoing use of a particular technology. The Council must first weigh the PAC recommendation prior to voting on the matter. Despite our lengthy relationship with this vendor, OPD has never provided any documentation that would support a finding that the benefits of using Shotspotter outweigh its costs. Our ordinance intentionally does not define benefits. Costs are generally to our privacy rights and civil liberties, the financial impact on the taxpayer, and the opportunity cost of using the technology. In the last few years, many independent statistical evaluations of Shotspotter have been published. These evaluations cover 75 jurisdictions, 25 years worth of data, and total just under 500 pages of research. I didn't cherry pick and omit any of the studies because they reached a different conclusion. None of the evaluations were favorable to Shotspotter, each finding a lack of sufficient efficacy to justify paying for the very expensive product. Researchers found that recovering guns and bullet casings at the scene does not lead to improved safety metrics. This might be due to a number of reasons, including America's lack of reasonable gun control measures, which make accessing guns quite easy. We're not keeping guns away from shooters. ShotSpotter no longer claims that its product will reduce or deter gun violence. So what exactly are we paying millions of dollars for?
The system was never designed to singularly reduce crime, increase arrests, find guns.
Perhaps the most significant challenge to evaluating is that it's human nature to add extra weight to anecdotal stories, especially when they pull on the heartstrings, like what is reported to have occurred in former Captain Joyner's situation. I have no doubt that OPD officers have personally experienced success with ShotSpotter. When something works for you personally, you might think that's representative, but it might not be. I am sure that we're going to hear in public comment today someone make the argument that if this technology saves just one life, it's worth it. Only counting wins is not how an evaluation works. Not only does ShotSpotter lack sufficient efficacy, but research shows that it is actually harming overall public safety. We'll get into this more a bit later, but the short answer is that with an artificial increase in workload, estimated as high as 200 to 300%, due to false positives, we are pulled away from other confirmed calls for service, and our overall response times for all calls increases, harming others. The evaluations show that the rendering of first aid on all calls for service is actually delayed, not enhanced by ShotSpotter. You've all seen the same recent media clips I have where Oaklanders are furious that OPD doesn't show up when called. Part of this is due to the dead-end deployments officers are being sent on. This finding demonstrates how harmful ongoing use of ShotSpotter can be, with a 259% increase in workload because of alerts. Philadelphia found no significant increase in confirmed gunfire. However, that 259% increase comes at a steep cost, not just to the taxpayer, but to victims of confirmed gunfire that is missed by ShotSpotter, and to any other confirmed call for service that is abandoned because an officer is forced to make a trade-off when receiving an alert, which takes priority. Not one independent evaluation of ShotSpotter found that the rendering of first aid was statistically significant. OPD has never provided any evidence that they are rendering aid. OPD says they have no reason to write a police report. 80% of the time they respond to an alert. So how often can they be rendering first aid? Even if the technology was accurate, which it isn't appropriate for OPD in our present circumstances because we don't have enough patrol officers to respond to alerts. OPD has admitted repeatedly in the past that they are overwhelmed by ShotSpotter. According to the Center for Public Safety Management, on average, 2.3 units respond to each alert in Oakland. At minimum, that's 2 of our 35 patrol officers wasting their time on a dead-end deployment. The public is furious at the lack of response by OPD. But because of politics, no one is willing to call one reason why OPD is so slow to respond, ShotSpotter. The evaluations referenced in this deck did not all measure the same metrics. Of those that measured the type of crime, each found that the respective police department was not likely to arrest a perpetrator of true violent crime, but rather negligent discharge and backyard target practice. This is consistent across jurisdictions. So even if Shotspotter was accurate and didn't send us on wild goose chases and didn't require a human response that we can't presently meet, it still isn't helping Oakland reduce violent gun crime. I'm always asked why police fight so hard for something if they know it doesn't work. For one thing, they might not know. OPD has historically resisted tracking its use of surveillance technology. They have no data scientists on staff, and despite the legal requirement in our ordinance that a technology's track record be first considered, OPD has not done so. On the heels of the Domain Awareness Center discussion in the spring of 2014, former OPD Chief Went told the truth about Shotspotter and was eviscerated for it. The council forced him to renew the contract, despite any evidence that it worked. Please note the themes in these next couple of slides. In 2014, OPD said that Shotspotter is expensive and redundant, that people are calling in gunshots, and that the money could be better spent elsewhere, like air support. It is the same story 10 years later. The data also supports across the country and here in Oakland that residents have decreased calling the police due to a lack of responsiveness. Shotspotter only further exacerbates this issue because of the artificially increased workload, which forces us to deprioritize confirmed 911 calls for service. Here's another key point. OPD knew at least a decade ago that a Shotspotter alert by itself is unhelpful. They told the council 10 years ago that they couldn't keep up with the number of alerts, but the electeds weren't listening. The evaluations cited too in this deck reached the same conclusion. Without the extra context from a human-initiated call, an alert likely won't improve public safety. Michael Topper co-authored one of the larger evaluations of Shotspotter use in Chicago, and he specifically looked at the issue of response times and rendering of first aid. His research, like that of other evaluators, shows that Shotspotter use is actually harmful, not just lacking in efficacy. The research does support that alerts likely get police somewhere faster. But with an absurd error rate, this only means that we're quicker to get to the wrong location. And abandoned calls and overall response times are the worse for it. This slide reflects the percentage of unfounded or unconfirmed gunshots. Ideally, this percentage would be 0. Of those cities where we have data, Oakland is the second worst in the country. This slide represents the percentage of deployments where police write up a report. Ideally, this percentage would reflect 100, meaning no wasted deployments. We're sadly among the leaders at a paltry 20%. Every single day, the technology misses confirmed gunfire. Shotspotter used to claim an 80% accuracy rate. And in the proposed contract in our agenda packet today, they are now contractually promising 90%. Across the country, customers are not seeing such results. Shotspotter breached its previous contracts with us by failing to provide at least an 80% accuracy rate, and I think Oakland should demand its money back. It's also noteworthy that Shotspotter has aggressively refused to allow its system to be independently audited, hiding behind claims of trade secrets at criminal trials. Prosecutors are forced to withdraw Shotspotter-related data because it can't stand up to a defense evidentiary challenge. Lay people often suggest that data from other jurisdictions isn't relevant. Having worked with almost 100 different police departments on surveillance technology matters, it is clear that at volume the data is remarkably consistent across jurisdictions. This consistency makes it easy to spot outlier numbers, which I'll discuss in a moment. It is true that not all gunshots are called in by the community, but that is a problem that can be addressed independent of Shotspotter, as Mobile, Alabama found. Improved relationships and responsiveness will go a long way towards addressing this concern. It is important that you understand that Shotspotter's claimed accuracy rate is fiction, an invention of its marketing team. Let's return to a couple of our themes, including the need for human intel. The St. Louis Police Department hired a local PhD data scientist to help evaluate its use of Shotspotter and it found a stunning disparity between founded crime incidents, due only to a Shotspotter alert compared to a community-initiated call for service. This quoted paragraph is their conclusion, and it mirrors the concerns we have in Oakland. A higher volume of unfounded calls does not improve Oakland's public safety, but actually harms it because our overall response times get worse. On October 8th at the Public Safety Committee, OPD reconfirmed that its priority 1 average response time is an hour. Chicago's Office of Inspector General issued a scathing audit of their use of Shotspotter. Because of statistics like these, Chicago's mayor ended their contract. I understand that Chief Mitchell desires that we continue to use Shotspotter. He was at Kansas City during a few of the years that this 10-year statistical evaluation covered. None of Kansas City's Part 1 crime types experienced any meaningful improvements from Shotspotter use. Please note the researchers and sources of these respective studies, including the U.S. DOJ National Institute of Justice Subunit and the Cook County State's Attorney. These are not far-left anti-police activists. You will notice from these dates that there has been an accelerated movement away from Shotspotter as more evaluations of the technology become publicly available. Since 2015, at least 24 jurisdictions have either declined entering into or have not renewed Shotspotter contracts. New York's contract expires in December and is now at risk of cancellation. Houston may terminate early. OPD admits that on average, 80% of the time they don't write a police report due to lack of anything actionable. If Shotspotter alerts are 90% accurate, why do we only write reports 20% of the time? Earlier, I alluded to outlier numbers sticking out in an obvious manner. You will recall that during our mobile automated license plate reader moratorium discussion, OPD claimed that it attributed 144 successes due to license plate reader alerts. I thought that was rather important to consider during the PAC's review, so I asked OPD to see the documents to aid our evaluation. OPD refused. I submitted a public record request, knowing it would not be honored. I successfully litigated and obtained the records. For those of you that were on the dais in October 2022, you'll recall that I showed a color-coded chart based on OPD's data that what it said were 144 successes were at most just 7. We have had 4 Shotspotter annual reports since our ordinance was enacted. The first report claimed that 91% of gunshots were not called in by the community, which immediately triggered suspicion. Fortunately, the city hired a consultant that examined a number of OPD practices in that date range, including gunshot calls for service. OPD's data shows a 62-38 ratio, not 91-9. Remember what I said about outlier numbers being easy to spot. No independent evaluation in the country claims anywhere close to a 91 or 99% rate of gunshots not called in by the community. Research also supports that community-initiated calls have decreased due to historical non-responsiveness by OPD. The number of Shotspotter alerts includes false positives, so even this more accurate ratio has challenges. This slide shows data from an evaluation in Omaha, which measured human-initiated calls compared to alerts only. They found a 56-44 ratio. And when Omaha added duplicates to community calls, the community calls were greater than Shotspotter-only alerts. Durham found a similar ratio, 57-28 initially, but when duplicates were calculated, the ratio reflected 57-43, similar to what we're seeing in other jurisdictions. I am not suggesting that 40% is irrelevant, but the fact is that OPD's numbers throughout these reports can't be relied on. The 2 most recent annual reports were worse as to accuracy, with OPD claiming that 99% of gunshots in Oakland were not called in by the community, numbers no independent evaluator has ever reported. OPD did a cut and paste job year over year. The only number to change, the alerts, comes from the vendor. If we are to believe the 90% accuracy claim, why didn't the numbers change with 756 additional alerts? OPD has provided no evidence to support these numbers. Maybe Shotspotter is telling the truth in their contract, and we should carefully review these agreements before we execute them, as our ordinance requires. Shotspotter is telling us that their system isn't designed to accurately detect gunfire. This does raise an interesting legal question. I hope you direct the city attorney to get our $1.8 million back for the last contract. But how do you hold a party accountable when they tell you up front that their system isn't accurate, and we sign the contract anyway? As it was relevant to the PAC's review, I again asked for documents to support OPD's numbers. I shouldn't have to litigate to get data to do my job. This contract needs to end on the merits when we have the benefit of so much independent research, and OPD has failed to provide any evidence to substantiate sufficient benefits from use. An additional major red flag with this vendor is that because of the negative evaluations of their product, Shotspotter has created a webpage exclusively for its rebuttals, challenging the many studies. Shotspotter aggressively sues former employees and journalists for reporting on its lack of efficacy, attempting to chill further revelations that harm its revenue stream. As you might expect, they resort to claiming that none of these well-educated researchers understand data, or their system, or how to evaluate it, and the unseen and unproven benefits are there. Just trust us. I looked up 10 major surveillance tech vendors to see if they had anything similar. The combined rebuttals of these major companies is 0. Why is ShotSpotter so defensive? Because their product is finally being evaluated. Instead of cities like Oakland blindly believing whatever we're told. Out of all the municipalities I work with across the country, Oakland is probably the worst abuser of sole source agreements, willingly getting locked into never-ending contracts with police tech vendors that consistently raise their prices without proof of efficacy. City Hall is not looking out for the Oakland taxpayer. This year, the Alameda County Grand Jury released a report with the following findings, believing that OPD will not be able to increase their current staffing levels in the short or medium term. That OPD has, over the past decade, made a string of poor choices in choosing technology, that OPD does not consider effectiveness, maintenance, budget, or staffing requirements to ensure long-term usefulness, that minimal research is done by OPD into cost-effectiveness of its technology, that OPD cannot respond to all ShotSpotter alerts, or its officers would be overwhelmed. In addition to the large number of alerts OPD will soon receive from the new 300-camera ALPR system. The grand jury believes OPD will only respond to a small percentage of alerts. Many on the council believe these technologies to be force multipliers. A ShotSpotter alert cannot respond to itself, effect an arrest, or render first aid. It requires a human officer response just like our ALPR alerts. And each month, as we fail to keep up with the rate of attrition, we have less officers to respond to the alerts. As to ShotSpotter alerts, 80% of OPD deployments are wasted. These next few slides reference the independent evaluations I relied upon. ShotSpotter fails to meet the standard for ongoing use. The public is demanding greater responsiveness from its police department, a reduction in violent crime, and a strategy for the smash-and-grab thefts we're seeing go viral on the nightly news. $2.5 million is halfway to that fixed wing you want to acquire, which could help address high-speed chases. $2.5 million is a lot of community ambassadors, crime lab expansion, violence interrupters, homicide inspectors that carry too heavy a caseload. There are many areas of need with greater proven efficacy than this product that is being abandoned by many others. Prior to the April PAC meeting, I reached out to our Department of Violence Prevention to inquire as to whether discontinuing ShotSpotter use might negatively impact their operations. I wanted to ensure no unintended negative consequences might arise. I was told that it would not have an impact. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you for listening.